Hey everyone, we're live. This is Ask Basecamp, the Q&A live stream where we have our different teams help you understand how to go remote or how to thrive remotely. Today we're talking to ops. We're talking about how we do 24/7 ops. And so I have the ops team here. Hey fellas.
How's it going, Andy?
You want to introduce yourselves and talk about what you do for Basecamp?
Sure. I'm Blake. I work on ops. I work on a lot of our Kubernetes clusters mostly.
Yeah, I'm Troy. I lead the ops team, which also probably means I know the least about ops. But we're, kind of making sure all the stuff syncs up together.
And I'm Nathan. I'm also on the ops team. Work with Blake a lot on the Kubernetes clusters, and also manage some of the on-premises stuff.
Yes, maybe just kick this off a little bit with some overview of ops at Basecamp. As Nathan alluded to, we have stuff running both in the cloud and in our own data center or on-premise, as we often refer to it. So we're sort of regularly working in both sort of cloud ops as well as more traditional server-based operations. Our data centers are in Chicago and in Ashburn, Virginia. And we primarily use AWS for our cloud deployments. So we have a little bit of stuff in Google, but it just gives you an idea of the footprint. And maybe even, I think Andy had suggested just, how do we define ops at Basecamp? Because I know a lot of different companies refer to things about DevOps and SRE and different ways to think about it. And I tend to think about ops at Basecamp as being a little more purely operations. We do obviously build out and manage and run stuff across all of our infrastructure sets. But our number one job is to take the apps that the developers and designers build and make sure they're deployable and up and running on a 24/7 basis. And so we handle all on-call responsibilities, really all issues, all infrastructure provisioning, and kind of pretty wide scale of things, but on a pure ops basis. So we do some development work in terms of, Terraform and scripting and things that are required to monitor and manage and run all this stuff. But the actual apps are built by the dev and the design teams. And then we really just make sure that everything's up and running. Probably another thing, and maybe something that Blake will be able to talk about a little bit, is also that they're running efficiently, trying to really make sure that we're cost efficient in what we're doing, which has obviously been a big thing in the cloud, but even as we're looking at how often we update and change out hardware in our data centers, there's a lot of analysis in just terms of understanding efficiency and kind of staying with where we are. But anyway, Nathan, any other thoughts around how we think about ops at Basecamp that might be useful?
Well, since we're remote, we don't tend to have a lot of, super intense, whiteboard meetings where, we're all gathered in a room for, 4 hours while we try to tackle, whatever problem. So it's very much a message-based, asynchronous, let's discuss this, out loud through our messages. We use Basecamp, obviously, for most of our day-to-day collaboration stuff. And it really kind of forces us to think about the ideas that we want to convey, that we want to try to convince, if I have a position I want to convince everyone of, I've got to get it written down. I've got to get it shared in a way that makes sense for everyone to read through. It can't just be like a stream of consciousness, I've got to kind of very clearly portray the pros and cons. And then since we're all asynchronous, everyone else gets a chance to do their best, analysis on that idea, the pros and cons. It's I think there's a lot less force of personality behind a lot of our decisions. I came from a corporate background before I was at Basecamp, and usually it was the loudest, person in the room would end up getting the most time to talk. And that's not necessarily the case here. We do have, clearly we have people who are more senior, who, we try to, give their opinions more weight, but everybody has a seat at the table, and the asynchronous nature of how we handle most of that stuff really does let everyone's voice be heard. It's really nice.
I think the written culture is great too, because not only do you go from things where decisions end up being made in one meeting, we end up with the situation where like we talk about something in chat for a little while, then we say, okay, let's move this to a message. And then it may be 2 or 3 days while we sit and discuss this. And it's not just like round after round, it's that you actually have time to think about your answer and find pros and cons to the approach that you want to do. So you end up with a more coherent, better off solution most of the time.
Yeah, I think that carries over even to how we, manage incident response in terms of tracking, the messaging there, the write-ups and postmortems that we do, and the written communication. I know coming in less than a year ago, that has the added benefit of not only the thoughtfulness and the asynchronous in the moment, but the fact that there's a little bit more of a record of even being able to go back and sort of recall why some things were done. Or at least the thinking that was going on during that time has been useful in terms of picking up context for somebody coming in from the outside. So I think that those are good points and certainly things that have benefited us quite a bit.
Yeah. Troy, what do you think are just like the biggest interview question that everybody always likes to see? What do you think our biggest challenges as a team?
For me, it's just the breadth and scope of what we do with the size team, which might be useful for sort of sharing for people. But our ops team is 8 people. And so we're covering everything at Basecamp 24/7 with eight different people. And the big thing about that is that's really almost 4 completely different infrastructure platforms. And probably a dozen apps that are services that are actively running with customers on them. And I think that's a lot of complexity to handle with a small team. I think we do that pretty well, but certainly coming in new and feeling like you're confident on running, our legacy apps, which are running on ECS in the cloud, our big apps that run on-prem in our data centers, but have slightly different sort of approaches to active versus not. And then you've got some of the newer stuff that we're looking at with Hey that's kind of built out in the cloud and Kubernetes to begin with. And so you end up with a lot of diversity, which is on one hand super exciting. It's interesting for somebody like me who's a learner. I think there's a great opportunity to always be learning. There's also that feeling that you will be learning forever and still not really have your sort of feet underneath you, which I think can be a little bit daunting. So I think that for me is really just that breadth of having to be able to be in a position where you feel like if you wake up in the middle of the night and something's broken, that that enough things about those different platforms. But I would also say one of our strengths has been that everybody's really in this together. I think that's it kind of goes back. Not only is it not the loudest voice in the room from that standpoint, I think even when it comes to managing incidents and working, everybody's ready to jump in. Everybody's kind of ready to respond and help out, and there's not an unrealistic expectation that everybody's got to be an expert on everything.
I think the breadth of issues that the breadth of platforms and technologies that we use is also beneficial to us as team members too. I mean, before I started at Basecamp, I was working for university. And in that environment, you had services that were just 3-4 people managed those, like one particular service. And so they did, and they ended up very siloed in one particular type of technology. And that's not the case here because we're all touching all the platforms. We're looking at all the ways that we deploy apps and how we can make it more efficient. So you end up with a wider breadth of knowledge too.
Yep. And let's go. We have a question coming in over the live stream here. Which was asking if we had any plans to open source some of the ops tooling that we've developed internally. So Nathan, since I
Yes.
bright smile, let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So a couple of the tools that we use, we have open sourced, but this is something that's that I would like to see us do a bit more of. We have some great ideas around, and I'm not going to talk about any of Blake's stuff because I know he's been putting in a ton of work on the Kubernetes end. But we have, just some good quality of life things that we use day to day. That we've open sourced some of it, but I absolutely would love to get some of the other stuff out there. It's helped us. It can help lots of other people too.
I actually open source a tool that we use internally kind of for, we use BuildKite for CI. And I wrote a tool that can dynamically provision agents for each job that is created in a given pipeline. And that's available now under my GitHub, Blake Stoddard. So that's one tool that's recently come out. And we also, on the Kubernetes side, for Hey, our newest app, we switched to using a branch deploy system where every branch you create on GitHub can be deployed to a unique host name. And there's been a lot of work around that, around making it easy to use as a developer and making it easy for us to manage as operators. And I'd definitely love to see some of that open sourced.
Yeah, I think the other thing I would add to that is, we're looking to do more blogging and more just awareness and discussion around things that we do with Ops at Basecamp, because I do think some of the stuff, obviously we try to use open source tools wherever we can. We make heavy use of Terraform as an example, and I've used some other things in the past. And so I think we feel like some of that's always kind of custom and how do you open source it, but certainly some of these things we're using standard tooling. I think we could do a better job of blogging and talking and speaking about what we're doing. So maybe this live stream is the first chance for us to talk a little bit more openly about that. But you should. The other thing is, for a long time, I know when I came here, long time being 10 months, there's a lot of fear about actually us blogging on the SVN post, because it gets a lot of attention and sometimes it's very signal versus noise. Blog has been very business focused, but we've had some internal discussions and realized that we really want to get back to a little more technical roots on that. David in particular has been championing that. So you might have seen a recent post that we did on some troubleshooting we had with some S3 and networking issues as one first example of that. But we're also hoping to just start putting more blog posts out along those lines. So it's always easier to say we want to do that than it is to take the time to write it down. But it's great to get some encouragement from the audience to do more of that. So hopefully that's something you can hold us to as we're going forward.
Yeah, I have a list of blog posts that need to be written that I haven't done yet. So.
Yep. So yeah, we'll
now's your moment
after that. Exactly.
What are we talking about? What did I do?
Now's your moment to write those blog posts.
Oh, yes, I should do those. Yeah, I have a list like running postfix in Kubernetes, which is a lot of fun. We do that for Hey.
There's a lot of stuff around the Kubernetes architecture, and
handling things like mail in environments where things are stateless.
Yeah.
And I think that'll be an area in particular. We've talked about the Hey project coming up as that actually starts to roll out in the months ahead. There's been a lot, at least the innovation side of what we've been doing lately has been around that. So it's been a little hard to talk too much in detail until that product's more visible, but we're getting closer and closer to that. And I think that'll be a great opportunity for us to share some of the newer things that we've been working on. But I think it's also probably a great reminder. Oftentimes, I know in our ops group, it feels like the stuff we do just isn't worthy of sharing, and what I mean by that is, I think when you're reacting in the moment, oftentimes you sort of cobble things together or feel like you're making up for things you should have done right the first time. And there's a little bit of it's like, I don't really want to talk about this because I have to admit that maybe I wasn't perfect. And I think it's also good for us to hear from people that, hearing about our imperfections and understanding the reality of what we do every day and how we learn things is probably as useful as the stuff that, that we build right and are proud of from day one. And, probably something that we need to keep in mind is in thinking through some of that stuff.
Could also be something interesting, like where if we do have an incident where at X number of days afterwards, if it's not a huge customer impacting incident, where we release the postmortem, if it's not proprietary. Maybe someone to see how we write them, what we're looking at in those.
Yeah, we have all that stuff inside. And I think actually we're using status page IO now. There's actually a way where we can use some of that to attach postmortems to incidents and things as they go forward. That's probably something we want to start doing more publicly as well.
I was going to say the other thing is you could probably talk about just the whole process of us moving from our internal status page to the new statuspage.io setup with all of our PagerDuty integrations and how those are all kind of functioning. No, I don't think any of that's proprietary. And
no, I don't think so. Yeah,
it's a definite. I mean, it wasn't a trivial move. that we did. So I think there's a lot of meat there.
Yeah, good. Yeah, and just to put a little bit more around that, and maybe tease and help me write this out as I talk about it. But when I got here, one of the big things we've spent a lot of time on is really our emergency preparedness on two fronts. One is we've been actually getting more active about actually doing our fire drills, if you will, or doing our failovers. So we have different ways in which we can move from one data center to another. We can make a data center primary versus secondary, even down to the point of failing over our primary databases to secondary databases for maintenance stuff. So we've been trying to get to the point where we're actually exercising those much more commonly, as opposed to waiting to make sure they work. And this actually proved useful for me. I did a failover recently for our Basecamp 2 product, which normally runs out of our Ashburn data center, failed it over to Chicago and back. But in the process of prepping for that, found that we had made some internal DNS changes. We had actually helped with some of our automation to use some of the multi-factor authentication stuff for AWS. And the variable changes we made in that actually made our DNS script not work for the failover, which we wouldn't have found had we not been going through a test. And wouldn't have been catastrophic. I mean, there's a workaround that we could have done in the moment, but it's nice to get those, built into the tools. And so that's been one thing, is going through this exercise of having everybody on the team periodically keep these failover drills in production to validate that they work, doing restores of backups regularly into staging to make sure that the database backups and restore tools are working well, but also our communication system. So we had kind of built a custom internal status page and communications project, I guess quite a while back. But in some of the testing of doing that, we started to realize that the demand load, like you can test out a status page, for instance, build your own status page, seems pretty simple. Put that up, you can tell people what's going on. Well, when you got 100,000 users out there who want to know something when things break, turns out they can break that website pretty easily if you haven't thought about that coming along.
Yeah,
and so
dealing with the semantics of Nginx caching is no fun in the moment.
Exactly. And you want to host that on a site that you don't own, so that if your site's down, you're not actually getting your status site down. Lots to think about. And actually we made the decision this fall that finally that was getting too complicated for us and we should just use an outside service. So we moved to Status Page IO as the hosting for that. But even on the comm side, we had set up some custom Twilio notification stuff because, we're a company of 50 people. How hard can that be? Well, it turns out that sending text messages to 50 people can break spam detection stuff for a lot of providers, and it ends up being real hit and miss of whether those things go through. And so we've moved all of our emergency notification stuff into PagerDuty across the company using some of their tools. And so that's probably something that a blog post about how we're doing that and what we've learned through the process is a great suggestion. But it gives you some maybe teasing a little bit on that. And then since the question's still up about that here, about any interest in doing automated failovers or Chaos Monkey things, we've actually been doing a lot of rework of our tooling so that we're doing automated Basecamp 3 failovers on a regular basis in staging right now.
They go daily, right?
I think they go every day. We run an automated staging failover. We have not started running automated production failovers yet. So, we're not feeling that good about it yet. But
we don't. But I think we run like the dry runs to make sure the configs and everything are good to go in the case that we do need to do it.
Yeah, and so we will get NAGIAs, not notifications, anytime some condition for failover looks incorrect, I think on an hourly basis. So we're moving in that direction. And Matthew Vincent on our team has started playing around with some of the chaos engineering tools and building some sample scenarios. I know we've run through some examples in our staging environment, at least, of losing a database, but doing that with a tool and not actually flipping a database offline to interject some of those faults into the system. So we're on the very early phases, I would say, of playing with those tools, but it's definitely the next level for us to evolve to with how we think about our preparedness side of things.
We also get some automatic chaos monkeying type actions with Hey, because we use spot instances for almost everything. So we constantly think coming and going. We don't have long-lived pods that we have to worry about. So it's also a nice little fun quirk of spot instances.
Nice.
Yeah, nice.
It's been tricky. It's been tricky.
Yes, they were tricky yesterday.
Yes.
So, Nathan, maybe you can talk a little bit about how we adapt around. So we always talk about the calm company, or doesn't have to be crazy at work, and all the stuff about 40-hour work weeks and Monday through Friday only, don't work the weekends. But obviously with ops, a little different. Maybe you can tell people a little bit some of the things we do to kind of still be calm in ops, but with the reality of being a 24/7 operation.
Right. So, if you start with the reality of our customers are global and our systems need to be up all the time, then the 40-hour work week just doesn't really cut it all the time. You're always going to have someone who's going to get pulled away or needs to be on call. And that's just the reality of the operations work. There's no getting around it. It's kind of like support. Very similar to support in that our customers always will have questions and we need to have someone to answer them, because we don't want someone sitting there all weekend with a question when we have people around the world who can answer them. So when we did our last big hire in the ops team, we brought on 2 people in the EU to extend our time zones. Previously, we were highly concentrated in US East, the Eastern time zone. We had a couple, we had one in Central and then a couple in the West Coast at some point. But we really we're feeling the crunch where everybody was either on call and they'd be getting woken up. Even if we did have people who would take call for the other people, it was only a 3-hour overlap. And that really made it difficult. So we decided to stretch the time zones out a little bit. So now kind of what we plan on, the perfect world, is that when the people in the EU come on, they're going to take basically take an on-call override. So they're going to say, any pages, I'm awake, I'm at work today. I can handle all of these, even if they're not the one who's technically on call, if this isn't their shift. So they get up and they log in and take the override. And if something happens that they can handle, they'll handle it. Otherwise, they'll just page out the person who it was supposed to be and say, hey, we are having a serious problem with this. And conversely, if one of the EU people are on call and it's the end of their day, but people are still at work, we can pick it up for them as well. So that way we're handling the events that need to be handled during our workday with nobody having to wake up, or get paged when they're asleep. It's not perfect yet, but it's a lot better than it was. I'm really happy with it so far.
Well, I think you highlighted something that maybe people don't always think about in ops, that at least I've found is important a philosophy here too, which is a lot of that on call is about triaging and validating and not necessarily feeling like you have to know how to do everything. And that's made it a lot easier, I think, to jump into that rotation, because sometimes it's valuable, even if you aren't the expert on, our MySQL backends, you can do enough to validate and say, okay, this is a serious issue. Now we'll wake up the people that we want to. And so I think we trade off things like that. I think the other thing that's important is we really do still try to stick to ops as a 40-hour work week responsibility, which means if you end up in the middle of the night or on a weekend or doing a maintenance or something off hours, we certainly, will make that up by taking off early on a Friday. Or I know I've had a couple of late night, when I did this failover recently, we did that at 10 o'clock at night, my time, but I kind of took off around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, when, hung out with my kids a little bit in the afternoon, and then popped back on around 8 and kind of was on 8 to 11. So we still try to stick to that work time most of the time. And I think the company's been just hugely supportive of making sure that we're not just burning the midnight oil during the busy periods, getting free time.
That's my hot button is, like if you're up late and you're working outside of your normal hours, that's a part of work. So let's make sure that if you're up late, you get the rest you need for the next day, because nobody wants excuse me, nobody wants to work a 20-hour day and then have to come in the next day bright and early again and think that everything's going to be, I'm going to be at my best performance. I'm going to be at my clearest head. It just doesn't happen. So that's my thing is I'll constantly tell people, you need to just call it a day. You need to go home, or look, just take the day off. And I am not a manager. I don't actually officially get to tell people that, but it's worked so far. So
that's okay. I am the manager. My favorite phrase is what Nathan said. I just follow that protocol. Well, I think too. Oh, go ahead, Blake.
It's also important that we've been very recognizant of that during crisis times, like the beginning of last year when we were having a lot of stability issues. Wasn't a great time. And it was definitely stressful, but we were still pretty cognizant of the 40 hours is like what we're going to do. More than that, it becomes a drain mentally and physically on you. We should make sure that if you're working through the night or working early in the morning, that you are taking off time to compensate for that you're not just doing 12-hour days. So it's great to be around an environment where that is the case.
Well, and to put an exclamation point on that too, I think, time away from work is important. I was just thinking the group of us here, we're, gearing up for this new product launch. We're in code launch mode inside the company, yet, Blake took his prescribed sabbatical. The first month of the year would have been easy in a lot of companies to go like, hey, we're coming up to launch, Blake, you're critical to, but everybody was like, hey, go take your sabbatical. We need you fresh. Nathan actually took a week off to do a bread making class, which was, fun for me to watch all the bread that he's making, and maybe a great hobby during these times where we're pretty much stuck at home a lot. And even last week, with everything going on, I had a vacation planned, and like both everybody on the team and David were all like, get out of here. Like, you need to go rest up and be fresh and spend some family time. So I think really not only the 40-hour work weeks, but the vacation time when we all just work around it, right? We adjusted our on-call schedules when Blake was gone for a month. Make sure, obviously, that we don't have everybody take a vacation in the same week, but it is something we still try to stick to, even though there are lots of excuses not to.
I like this question a lot because it's very near and dear to my heart. I'm the youngest person at Basecamp by a couple years, I think. I'm 23. And Basecamp has really been all of my career. So how did I end up here is a great question. So I actually started as an intern at Basecamp back in 2016. So between my sophomore and junior years of college, I had known for a long, long time that I really wanted to be in an ops type field. And I saw that they put up a post for interns, and there were a bunch of example projects that looked intriguing to me. And I threw my resume into this hat with zero ops experience, thinking that this will go nowhere. And then after lots of interviews and a couple months later, they were like, hey, come join us for the summer. It's been great ever since. So for me, it was like luck, really, that I ended up in this position to be able to do something that I found out that I really, really liked. And I'm glad to be here.
It was great to have you here.
Thanks.
I mean, seriously, it's been awesome.
You haven't kicked me out yet, so
no, not yet. Personally, I've been into computers ever since high school. I'm twice Blake's age, so that's been longer. I initially went into programming, computer science, traditional C, Pascal, that sort of thing, and discovered that I wasn't fantastic at computer programming, but I was really good at operating the computers and working with them and maintaining them. I picked up a scripting language and started just kind of jumping in where I could. My first job was with Novell NetWare. I had an internship. So that's a long time ago. And then we had an internal posting. I was at Seagate Technology, the hard drive people. We had an internal posting for a Linux admin, Linux Solaris. And so I jumped over and have been doing Unix and Linux pretty much ever since. It just kind of fit. I don't know.
Yeah, I won't even talk about my age, but I don't really know how I got into ops. I have a good. I know why I'm here. I know why I like it. But I think at the gut, and I've done a lot of things. I've oddly been run everything from marketing groups to pure engineering to pure ops to just about everything. But I always gravitate back to ops. I think for two reasons. One is I love to solve problems, and there's just always an endless series of like, why is this? How does this work, and why does this work this way? But I also like fixing things and kind of the immediate impact. I went to school to be an electrical engineer and realized that the idea of having to wait years to see my projects to fruition versus being on a computer where you could type things in and see it almost immediately just kind of shows you my attention span problem. And ops is great for that because things change all the time. There's always something happening. There's always something new to learn. There's always some interesting problem to figure out and dig into and understand. And so I think that just, and then I love actually seeing those results in an immediate way. And so, just thinking offhand of yesterday, we had a problem that Nathan worked on where we started getting some slow response times from one of our apps. And, it didn't take a long time because we have some tooling together, but we, figured out that we had a broken client that sent us 37 million API requests, like 3-second API requests over the course of like
12 hours or something.
Yeah. But it was just awesome to be able to, it's awesome to be able to walk in, see that problem, jump into a couple tools, figure out the fixes, block an IP, and then watch the graphs go back to normal. And just, I think it's such a tangible way. But in terms of how you get into it, maybe you can listen to everybody's attitude here of a little bit of like, be willing to dig into ugly problems. In theory, I run the ops group, but I try to do, right now, because I'm kind of the most junior in terms of having been here, I try to pick off the simplest, easiest, most boring, mundane tasks because A, I can probably do them, and B, it frees up other people to work on things that are bigger. So I think it's that willingness to kind of do what it takes to jump into any kind of messy, hairy problem. You have to be a little bit thick-skinned in terms of, in some ways, if you're in ops, if you do everything perfect, nobody notices. That's an overstatement, but you can see everybody nodding their head, I think, in agreement that, if we do everything we're supposed to, nobody knows ops is here. And, you have to be willing to know that sometimes you'll only be singled out when things are broken. But I think there's a lot of internal satisfaction to knowing how often you're fixing things, how often you'll be able to resolve problems. That stability becomes appreciated over a long period of time. And so I do think it takes a certain personality to be happy with ops. But if you've got those traits, it's a lot of fun and very rewarding. And I certainly have a lot of very long, very deep relationships with people because there does become a little bit of an in the trenches. When you fought through a pretty ugly outage or maybe launched, maybe a better example is when you successfully launched a project at scale, you just build some long-term relationships and some stories that stick with you for a really long time. So I think it's a great situation for those who are suited to it.
I'm also firmly in the camp that like this is not a career path that you need to go to college for. All three of us have degrees, but my degree is in business, which is not applicable to ops. But if you need accounting help, I got you. But I think so much of the stuff that we do is not from things that we would be taught in the classroom. It's from things that we figured out just like sitting in a terminal window, typing commands from documentation, or digging into why is this alert going off? Okay, well, I know it's the database, but what is actually wrong with the database to be causing this? There's so many parts of it that it's just all experience and being able to just sit and figure it out rather than something you read in a book and learn in the classroom.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I was going to say, IndieQuest, if you've been configuring servers for a long time, it's absolutely realistic that you'd be able to make a switch over to ops. Not necessarily that you have to know how to configure servers to work in ops, because as we move more and more things to the cloud, that's actually less and less, needed. Excuse me. Especially with the push to containerization, where you need to know even less about the actual server that it's running on, and you can focus more around configuring and managing the application and the application configuration. It's very, very easy right now to get into the operation side of things. Like, I don't know of a time when it's been easier. You can pick up some blog posts on how to get started with Kubernetes. Kelsey Hightower has some fantastic Git repos where he walks you through getting started with Kubernetes the hard way, and it just walks you through all the core concepts. I'm going to try to put together a list of starting links or whatnot, and pick Blake's brain and Troy's brain as well, so that we can kind of maybe get that resource put up for people who might be interested.
Yeah, I think the key is just always wanting to be able to learn and just never like wanting to stand still. Because if you stand still, the world will keep moving past you, and all of a sudden you're using tech that's not relevant anymore.
Yeah, that's probably. I think you brought up a good point, which is you have to be. I think the best ops people aren't ever trying to feel comfortable that they know everything they need to know, because it's really hard, I think, to be a solid operations person if you just kind of go like, well, I'm going to be a Postgres expert, and I'm just going to be the guy who knows Postgres, because the world changes around you so much. And even, while there certainly are DBAs out there who do great work, that's probably a better suited than kind of the ops, where you need to not only know Postgres, but you need to understand the networking part and the Linux component and the app server stuff, because these stacks are big and complex and they don't always put together the way that you want to, and figuring out where those things are in the creases. And the minute you think you know how to provision servers in a data center, Kubernetes walks along. And the minute that you feel like you know GCP, you're moving to AWS. And then you think, I know I'm going to update my CentOS servers today, and Red Hat drops the update scripts and tells you got to reinstall all of them. And, it's just
it's troubleshooting and problem solving. I mean, that's really what ops is.
That is the thing. And that ability to stay on top and be willing to sort of dive into anything is super important.
Yep.
Professional troubleshooter.
Yep, with an ever-changing toolbox and problem space.
The last recommendation I would just have in terms of things, I would go, more and more companies are publishing incident reports that are pretty detailed about like things that happen and processes.
Hey, we should do that.
Hey, we do. Well, we did have one. John put up the one we went through about debugging the.
Out of order packets.
So that's one example. But I think those kind of things I think also give you a feel for just what the sleuthing is like. The process of sort of going from I know something's broken to figuring out what it is and sticking through that. So anyway, thanks for all those questions. I appreciate that.
Or if you have more, keep sending them. Don't matter.
Yes.
Yeah. Or if you're interested in AWS or like cloud services as a whole, I know AWS has a free tier, and then Google Cloud will give you $300 that you can use over the course of a year. So spin up a Kubernetes cluster and try to break it, and then, or like just wreck it, and then try to figure out what you have to do to put it back together. That is the easiest way I found to learn, is to break things and try to fix them. Just try not to break production.
It's helpful to have a staging environment. I've been very pleased with that as of late. Saved me some trouble down the road.
Yeah.
Blake, I've got an out of band question. Is it true that the ops team at Basecamp is sponsored by Chick-fil-A?
Cannot confirm.
Or is it Popeyes?
It's Popeyes.
Popeyes.
I went to Popeyes on Monday. Sorry.
I was going to say, I feel like it changes. For a while, it was, I don't know.
Oh, it's Five Guys, actually.
Okay.
I have a T-shirt that says sponsored by Shake Shack as well. So
I was going to say, it's hard to keep them straight. But
yeah.
I got a question. What are some of the drawbacks of remote ops team? Like we always talk about the benefits, but what are some challenges you guys have not being in the same room?
Well, I think, from my perspective, there are those kind of crucial, even for incident type things, where if everybody was in the room together, the high bandwidth communication would be a faster way to get through problem solving. It can be a little tricky, particularly since I'm usually the coordinator around incident response, to kind of know what people are doing and what's happening at any given time. And I think it's hard not to go into heads down problem solving mode and then forget to communicate to other people what's going on. Even yesterday, Nathan and I were working on an issue, and I realized like we were both editing an IAM perms file simultaneously, and it was in staging, so it was okay.
Yeah.
But it's just like I would have known he was changing the file while I was changing the file if we'd been in the same room, and remotely some of those things are tricky to keep track of. So I don't know. That's one. Nathan, I'm sure you've got some others that come to mind.
Yeah. So earlier I mentioned that since we're not all in the same room, we don't have these massive big whiteboard meetings, which those do sometimes have upsides. Sometimes there is a fantastic synergy where you do have people in the same room brainstorming and bouncing ideas off of each other, where you can, pass the marker off and they get to sketch out their idea and everyone kind of goes, oh, I hadn't thought about it that way. So we occasionally try to yearly actually do an ops meetup where we all get together off-site in one location, and we're able to do some of that. It's it's really great. We're able to banter, bounce ideas back and forth. Maybe work up a skunkworks project that needs a little bit more work behind it than just kind of the brain, discussion. We need to actually get some code out and see how this works. And we're really able to kind of, focus and work on those things at those times. So you do miss some of the, I guess, the spontaneity on some of that because things are so asynchronous.
There's some missing high bandwidth pieces that I get those really easily at our company-wide meetups and at our team meetup. Like we were just at a team meetup a couple weeks ago. We have this new app coming out. Hey, one of the things that I've been working on along with John, one of the other people on our team, has been load testing. And we're running into some issues with a few database queries. And like these are things that we can totally do remotely. We can figure out, but the turnaround time when you're sitting across the room from your database expert on the team is so much faster than having to like ping them and write it out and say like, hey, I'm having this problem. So yeah, really, there's a certain high bandwidth things that I miss.
Troy, how about you from a managerial perspective? I know you came from Planet previously and Rackspace before that, and I'm assuming most of that wasn't remote.
Planet was remote. I was kind of hired in to build a remote team, so I had some experience there. And at Rackspace was interesting. Most of my Rackspace career was not remote, but a lot of what I did at Rackspace was run our OpenStack work, which was essentially distributed by nature because it was an open source project worked on people around the world. So I've been there for a while, but I think you sort of brought up the key thing. This high bandwidth communication opportunity is critical. It's why the in-person at least twice a year, and we do twice a year as a whole company, and I think the once a year just as an ops team is pretty crucial as a part of that. And I think even opportunistically, Blake lives in the same general vicinity as one of our other ops team leads, and so they will occasionally co-work when they get a chance to. I know, actually, I think didn't you and Nathan, along with Aaron, end up at KubeCon together?
Yes.
Which might have sparked another recent skunkworks project that sort of came out of some of that. So I think, not only the formal things, but even sometimes looking at some opportunistic things to build those relationships as well as kind of that high bandwidth communication. I'd probably say the biggest issue for me as a new manager coming in is just getting to know the team and not having the benefit of a lot of in-person. We because of what's going on with COVID, we've canceled our April meetup as a company. And for me, that basically means I'm going to go my first year at Basecamp with one in-person meetup with the entire team, just because I was at the ops meetup, which got cut dramatically short. So that was 24 hours for me to be with you guys there because of a personal emergency. So I think that's probably been the hardest thing. But I would also say people have been really great about spending some time, and I've been able to overcome that. But it's just not nearly as because the chatting through a chat room when you don't know someone well makes it more complicated. It's the fundamental attribution error. It's like, well, I would never say that. Like I've had to kind of learn that oddly enough, you might not figure this out, but there's a bit of a difference in personality between Blake and Nathan in terms of, the serious one and maybe the not so serious one. I'll just leave it at generalities like that. But, learning those nuances and how the team communicates and even how to plug in, because, Basecamp, I think the shortest tenured ops person besides me has over 2 years on the team. Some of the team members are 5, 6, 7 years on the team, and plugging into that from a pure remote standpoint can be tricky. But I would say Basecamp's compensated for that pretty well. I haven't felt like it's hurt me as much as it logically seems like it should have, but it's definitely been an issue.
I think it can also be hard to so we do so many things over text, and I think it can be hard to figure out the emotion that somebody's trying to convey unless you really know them. It can be hard to figure out, okay, are they being sarcastic? Are they just trolling me? Because certain people at Basecamp are huge trolls. And so it can be hard to figure out whether somebody actually means what they say without knowing them as a person and knowing their personality. And that is something that you do miss if you don't actually spend time with people every once in a while.
Well, thank goodness you guys worked on the Giphy plugin for our Basecamp ops today. So I'm sure that'll fix all of this. And maybe we are running out of things to talk about.
Dangerous GIF roulette. Yes.
Yeah.
What could go wrong?
Yeah, I might have to look at that preview function as a follow-on to that enhancement.
Well, thanks for your time, fellas. I think that's about it. We're going to do these Q&As pretty regularly. A lot of companies are going remote right now, and we want to share what we know to be helpful. I know next week we're going to have Jason and David do a walkthrough of how we use Basecamp, an actual walkthrough of the Basecamp account. You can hit your questions at hashtag #AskBasecamp. It feels weird to say hashtag in real life, but it is what it is. So thanks for your time, fellas. I'll see you online.
Yeah, and I'm out there on Twitter. I know Blake is as well. If you guys have questions, hit us up out there too. So happy to help out wherever we can.
Cool. See ya.
Later.